When it comes to the cybersecurity space, natural language processing, I think, has a strong use case in the phishing space and in the spam space as well. Being able to identify and detect spam and phishing emails based on past information. When it comes to behavioral biometrics, that has a very good use case in the identity space, being able to identify an entity online. And that kind of identification can be used for multi-factor authentication, continuous authentication, fraud detection, account takeover, bot detection, web scraping detection, forensics. The list goes on and on.
Welcome to CyberSecurity Heroes, an IRONSCALES podcast about you, the heroes of cybersecurity. You're about to hear and learn practical and experiential knowledge in our conversations with security leaders and practitioners and other influential InfoSec stars so we can become more cyber resilient and safer together. CyberSecurity Heroes is brought to you by IRONSCALES, the most powerfully simple email security platform. And I'm your host, Brendan Rudd. And now, let's get into the show. Hey, Justin. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Brendan. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and before we get into the show, today's episode is a little different, a little more technical. So I'm really excited to dive into the weeds for our tech fans out there. So before we dive in, could you just tell us a little bit about you, your background, and what you're working on these days?
Yeah, sure. My name's Justin. I am a cybersecurity researcher. Right now, my focus is on behavioral biometrics and adversarial machine learning. Basically, identifying humans and other types of entities, the way they use their computers, and being able to identify those entities over and over again based on their behavior. That's my focus. That's my area of study. And it's something that I'm actively posting about and doing right now.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue to my next question, and probably for many out there as well listening right now. What is behavioral biometrics and why are you so passionate about it?
That's a good question. I started this identity business about 10 years ago. I really had an incredible interest in researching ways to identify people online, and things have changed a lot over the last decade. Today, behavioral biometrics is a special way of doing that by analyzing the way people move their mouse on a surface, by taking a look at the way people type keys on a keyboard, key up, key down, and by taking a look at the way people use their smartphone devices, where they position their thumbs to swipe right and left and up and down. And by taking all of this very unique data, we're able to build unique behavioral profiles for users or entities online. And the reason why I use entity is because it's becoming more and more difficult to determine if an entity is human or non-human, a bot, right? Because of the rise of artificial intelligence, advanced threat actors are using artificial intelligence to simulate keyboard and mouse movement. And that's another area of focus of my research, because it's just so important to really understand everything that's happening in this behavioral biometric space and not just focus on one thing.
And you mentioned having a lot of experience with natural language processing, also known as NLP. Is behavioral biometrics the natural evolution of after NLP?
That's a very difficult question. You see, natural language processing basically just allows computers to understand what humans are saying, whether it be typing via text or whether they speak it via voice. And the kind of data and models that are built in the natural language processing space are a little different than the type of models and data required in the behavioral biometric space. But In both spaces, data is really something that's very important and that should be prioritized for model building. In both spaces, you need to be able to consume, manage, curate, and engineer data properly. Otherwise, the projects are just going to fail. So while they do have differences, when it comes to the machine learning part of it, there are some inherent similarities.
And could you talk to some of the use cases for NLP and behavioral biometric technology? And second part of the question would be, are you seeing it more in cybersecurity these days?
There are a lot of them. And I know this is a cybersecurity podcast, but if you want to talk use cases, it goes way beyond cybersecurity, right? Just natural language processing alone is automating call centers. It's facilitating the way people interact with consumer products. It's increasing user experience. It's allowing organizations to analyze text to better extract valuable information that can then be used for business decisions. So natural language processing has a lot of benefit outside of the cybersecurity space. I know for a lot of LinkedIn videos I make, I drag and drop the video, I click automatic captions, and it does it for me. So it makes life a lot easier. Now, when it comes to the cybersecurity space, natural language processing, I think, has a strong use case in the phishing space and in the spam space as well. Being able to identify and detect spam and phishing emails based on past information. When it comes to behavioral biometrics, that has a very good use case in the identity space, being able to identify an entity online. And that kind of identification can be used for multi-factor authentication, continuous authentication, fraud detection, account takeover, bot detection, web scraping detection, forensics. The list goes on and on. My focus when I was working at natural language processing was not within the cybersecurity realm. But I know for a fact that if natural language processing is anything like behavioral biometrics in the cybersecurity space, there are many use cases. And just the two that I brought up were on the top of my head. I'm sure that if I sat down and really dug into it, I could probably find a few more.
Yeah, you may not know this, but we actually use natural language processing in our technology to prevent business email compromise. So the way we use it is to pick up on fraudulent communication patterns, like looking for sentiment, context, content, keywords. So that's another use case where it can be used in phishing and business email compromise specifically.
Yeah, and the use case you just described is just such a natural fit for natural language processing, because at the end of the day, we want to have an automated way to learn things. We have analysts who sit down, who take a look at emails on a daily basis, who are able to flag, hey, you know what? This is not a right email. This is an okay email, right? And over time, you collect a very large amount of data. And the nice thing with this natural language processing stuff is that once the work, the really hard work, because this is not fun work. This is not all fun and games, right? AI is fun. We take a look at those solutions and we say, wow, it's like magic. But in reality, to actually get it to work, it's a lot of really boring and repetitive work that's probably being done by humans who need to go through all these emails and label and all this kind of really laborious work. But once that's done, you could have a really good solution offering, pretty much like the one you guys are offering, that has the ability to then detect and flag potentially unwanted emails from a system.
Yeah, and I know we're going to dive into that topic a little bit more on the human vetting of inside the process of AI and ML. But before we get there, there's a lot of fog and confusion in cybersecurity around AI and ML. So ML meaning machine learning for those who are not familiar. So can you simply define in your opinion or per textbook, what is AI and ML? What are the textbook definitions and how do you explain it?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think that there really are any definitions. Everybody really uses these terms really loosely. And that's why I think that they're in some cases, there is a bit of confusion around these terms, right? So the way I like to see it is I like to see AI as being, or artificial intelligence as being an umbrella term for everything pretty much computer related. If else statements, AI. Machine learning, AI. Whatever it is, AI, right? So, because at the end of the day, a lot of organizations out there are slapping that AI label on everything, and it's simple rules, right? So at the end of the day, I think that AI is a very broad label to apply over many different artificial ways of making decisions, including if-else statements. Now, I know some people might disagree with me, so be it. When it comes to machine learning, now that's a little different. I think that machine learning is more when working with large quantities of data and being able to build models from that data to then make predictions or generate some kind of information, once again, based on that data. So if we take a look at the type of machine learning models we have today, we have gradient boosting models that are really good for tabular data. We have artificial neural networks. We have recurrent neural networks. We have CNNs. We have all kinds of different models that can be used for different things. And at the end of the day, it's up to a machine learning engineer or a team of data scientists to sit down and to say, hey, what kind of data do we got? And what kind of model makes sense for the kind of data we have right now? You can't just use any machine learning model for any kind of data. It's every kind has a specific use case.
So can you talk to some misconceptions around machine learning and AI?
It's a tough question because there are many misconceptions around machine learning and AI. I think that the first big misconception is that AI is a silver bullet. AI will solve all your problems. And at the end of the day, that's just simply not true. To have a really strong model and to have a really strong predictive product, you need to have a very good team behind it. You can't just build a model and say, all right, that's it. We're good to go. We're going to let this AI run and we're all set. We need to have a really good team behind it. And we need to keep on labeling data. We need to stay on top of data. And we need to rebuilding these models as new data and new information comes in so that the model maintains its efficiency. Another thing that I think is a misconception is when people see machine learning outputs or results and the accuracy is going to be really high or the results are going to be really good. Sometimes it might happen a few times, but over time, that might not be the case. Sometimes people, sometimes people like to doctor the results to make believe models are actually better than they actually are. So I think it's also really important to take a look at what reality is and what the AI is flagging, and then log it and actually compare that to real results that are verified by human beings.
So you touched on the importance of the team behind the AI and the ML models. Would you also agree that the quality of the data is equally important as part of building those strong or accurate, trustworthy performing models?
Absolutely. And the reason why I said that the team is really important is because I actually mean exactly what you just said, the data. If you don't have a good team in place to support that data, the data is not going to be good. It's going to be bad quality data. And as a result, it's going to be bad machine learning models, or it might just not work. So I feel that today there's a real big push to offshore a lot of this heavy lifting when it comes to data, because once again, it's not fun and it's time consuming. So there's a real big push to say, hey, you know what? Let's just ship it off overseas. Let's pay someone a really low amount of money. They'll do it themselves. Big deal. Who cares? Once we get that data, we'll then be able to build the models. The problem with that is that if you do that, you get what you pay for. And when it comes time to curate data, you really don't want to let it go to anyone. You really want to do it almost internally. You want to do it with really trustworthy people. You want to do it very meticulously. You want to have a verification process behind it. You want to have all of these checks and balances to really make sure that when when a team of people are looking at data, it's being done properly. Because if it's not, the end result just won't work. You just won't have a good machine learning model, or it'll be faulty, or you won't even be able to build it in the first place.
CyberSecurity Heroes is brought to you by IRONSCALES, an AI-powered, self-learning email security platform that helps security professionals proactively prevent, detect, and remediate phishing attacks in a matter of seconds, not hours or days. And we have an exclusive offer for our podcast listeners. Discover dormant phishing threats in your organization's mailboxes. Get a free 90-day scan back with a detailed report. Integrate in seconds with 2 clicks via API to Microsoft Office 365 and see what your current email security is missing. Go to ironscales.com/free scan to learn more.
And where does deep learning fit into all of this? Because that's another term that I think there's a lot of confusion around.
Yeah, good question. When I was talking about machine learning, those terms, I talked about a model called gradient boosting. And that's not deep learning. That's something that we call shallow learning. And basically, I think that the difference between shallow and deep learning is really when people start talking about the neural networks, artificial neural network, recurrent neural network. And when we talk about these networks, there could be many layers to these kinds of networks. Many different layers can track many different features that'll make it easier for the model to extract valuable information and make predictive results, good high prediction results, or high accuracy results. If you just use one layer, that's not deep. If you use 2 layers, now we're getting deep. If you use 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 layers, now you're getting deep, right? So deep is a term, once again, that's sometimes used loosely in this space, because very often you'll build models where just one layer is required, and that is not deep. That's just a simple neural network. So deep learning typically refers to neural networks that have multiple layers within them.
Okay. And I remember the last time we spoke, we were discussing why ML and AI gets a bad rap when being used to sell products. Can you touch on a few of those points on why you think it gets a bad rap, and maybe you have a solution on how marketers could or salespeople could, do a better job of explaining?
Yeah, I work in data and machine learning, so I'm accustomed to the kind of issues that arise when people try to sell and also buy artificial intelligence solutions. And I think that the first thing is really this label of AI just being slapped onto everything. Is it able to say yes or no? It's AI. Is it able to blink? It's AI. Is it able to send an email? It's AI. So now what we have is we have organizations that are pretty much saying AI to everything to be able to compete in a crowded marketplace. Another area that I think is challenging is when vendors promise or curate certain accuracy levels. So they'll typically doctor accuracy levels. They'll say, hey, our model is able to do this with, 99% accuracy. When in reality, if you actually take a look at what's happening in the background, it's a little less than that. And it takes a vendor a while to, I'm sorry, not a vendor, but a purchaser. It takes the purchaser a while to actually figure that out, because they need to validate what the AI is saying and then validate what the reality is. And when they put the two together, they start to see, hey, what they promised is not reality. Another area is, I think, once again, people just use the term really loosely. So they'll get into meetings, purchasers will get into meetings with vendors, they'll start throwing the term AI around the room. But the moment someone with a bit of technical expertise starts questioning the vendor, they can't answer the question anymore because they don't even know what the hell they're talking about. So I think that's another reason why AI gets a bad rap. There are probably a bit more, but I think that those are probably the three that are most important for me.
And I remember one other one that you mentioned. You said that people who know are confused and people who don't know are confused.
Yeah. And there is a lot of confusion in this space. There's an enormous amount of confusion in this space because everybody has their own kind of definitions. Like you asked me what my definition was at the beginning of this podcast. I gave you one. I gave you one based off of my experience and based off of my knowledge. But at the end of the day, maybe a textbook says something different, or maybe the next guy says something different. So everybody has their own definitions. And what that creates is it creates a lot of confusion on the purchaser side. And it also creates a lot of confusion when it comes to individuals that are starting to enter the technical world of machine learning, because it's actually really difficult to find good content. Everybody's writing blogs about it. Half of the blogs are wrong. So you actually got to sit down and do a lot of research and almost follow a curriculum guided learning experience to actually truly understand machine learning.
So I want to quote one of your LinkedIn posts, and just you said, we often throw around terms of artificial intelligence and machine learning for sales and marketing purposes. However, without a proper data strategy, your AI and ML won't work. We're better off putting AI and ML on the back burner for a while and concentrate 100% of our focus on data quality and management. So would you mind explaining what exactly you meant there?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, that quote is my favorite because it's a truth. When we build predictive products, we often try to rush towards the model building or the artificial intelligence building, whatever you want to call it. And we forget about the data. We think what we got is sufficient, and then we start building and it doesn't work. I'm a strong believer that focusing 80 to 90% of your time on data yield results that are far superior than if you didn't spend 80 to 90% of your time on data. I believe that if organizations spend their time on data, the vast majority of their time on data, the model building will actually consume a very small percentage of the total amount of the predictive product project. So it's going to take a very small amount of time to actually build out those machine learning models if you spend a good amount of time on the data. So in that quote, the real goal was to recommend people not to rush the model building. Forget about it. It'll take care of itself. If you just concentrate on the data and make sure that's high quality, you're good to go. You're golden. So just focus on the data. And it's funny because I hear myself saying data over and over again, and it must be so cliche, or it might even be boring. But at the end of the day, it's so important because none of this AI stuff matters if it's not for that.
So other than data, what can we do better to serve and preserve the respect that AI and ML are bringing to our products when talking about them?
I think that consumers today are more educated than they were in the past. And I believe that consumers today are starting to understand what real AI and what real machine learning is compared to a slap-on label people put on products. I think that vendors should do a better job at explaining how data is an integral part of their product, because at the end of the day, the consumer who knows and is knowledgeable is going to be able to call out baloney very quickly if people don't present reality. So if I have a product, I slap on an AI label and I just go around saying AI, I may be able to close a few deals. That might work. But when I actually go close bigger deals with people that are really well informed, they actually start asking me tough questions. and I don't know what I'm talking about, I think that's an area that we all really need to work on as an industry, as like this whole cybersecurity industry, right? Don't say it's AI if it's not AI. Just say it's rules, a rule-based product. If it is AI and if it is natural language processing, by all means, say it and be specific about it. Say it's an NLP fraud product. And that way people are going to say, wow, they're really using AI, because now we're getting specific into what kind of AI we're using. So I think being specific might help.
As they say, the devil is in the details, and make sure it solves a problem or a use case. Don't just throw it out for the sake of sounding sophisticated. So taking this back to the cyber discussion, how important, in your opinion, is AI and ML in the cyber war? Because we are being attacked with, some will say, less sophisticated means, but there are sophisticated groups out there that have the resources and sophisticated tools.
Paramount. It's the single most important thing people should be focusing on today. We have relatively basic machine learning, rule, fraud detection algorithms out there that are able to flag stuff when it skips a heartbeat or whatever. But the issue is what you just described, where we have very well-funded, well-organized nation-state attackers. And these people have the money. These people have the engineers. These people have the data to build machine learning models that will attack and successfully attack yours. It's a challenge. It's a real big challenge. And I think it's a challenge that we're not ready for just yet. I think it's a problem that's going to grow over the next, I'd say 5 to 10 years. It's going to grow a lot because we're really not ready. We're still using non-AI rule-based engines in so many areas right now. And this AI, like adversarial machine learning, which is an area that I focus on a lot. And the reason I focus on it is because it would be naive for us to close our eyes or put our head in the sand and make believe it doesn't exist. A lot of people out there, they say, my AI will work wonders. What we should really focus on as well is to have a separate team of adversaries within an organization who's trying to attack those AI models constantly, because that's the only way AI models will have the level of resilience to prevent from future attack. And also, I think that having a multi-layered approach to securing digital assets is also such an important thing, because if you just have one layer, you're screwed. You got to have multiple layers. And AI, in my opinion, is just one of those many layers.
So as we wrap up today's episode, I'd love to close on this question. Where, in your opinion, can AI and ML give us the upper hand to fight back against cyber criminals, or even to just keep up?
Yeah, I think that AI is definitely going to play a big role in anything that really has to do with data and patterns and data and pattern matching and analysis. At the end of the day, because attackers are changing the way they execute attacks, I think it's really important that to keep up, we're going to need to build new models, take a look at the data we currently have, and rebuild models on the fly, on the go, right? Maybe every day or every week or every month or whatever. And I also think that it's important to keep up with the research that's coming out of academic institutions and larger AI companies, and really understand how that kind of research impacts real AI applications.
And are you able to give some specific use cases, let's say in terms of like products, use cases, scenarios? For example, the email security world, we can do things like, you said, pattern matching, aggregating information or patterns so that users don't have to manually sift through the same data or similar attacks. And that obviously saves time. It reduces the time from detection to response. Do you have any kind of other use cases that you would like to share? Maybe it's from your area of expertise.
Yeah, no, to be very honest with you, I think that email is a very good example. And I think that email is a good example because it uses the same technology that different cybersecurity spaces are going to be using. So for example, if we take a look at emails, the way that we detect fraudulent emails or account takeover or whatever, what happens is we're taking a look at user behavior or hacker behavior. And the nice thing about that is as behaviors evolve and change over time, these models keep on learning and you keep on rebuilding these same models with different data. And that's really how AI is going to keep on advancing with the changing threat landscape. So maybe phishing is going to evolve over the next year or two or three. And I say maybe it is going to evolve over the next year or two or three. And by collecting that data and by retraining models, it's just going to improve.
Thank you so much, Justin. I hope we've managed to demystify to some degree today with today's episode. But before we close out, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, it was a pleasure chatting with you. I think that it's really important for people to do their own research and do real research. Look at journals online, read articles from, well-established organizations, make their own research, do their own research, make their own decisions. I think that's probably one of the most important things to do.
So I want to move into the lighter section of the show, which we call the rapid fire questions. If you could invite one or two people to our show, who would it be and why?
Yeah, I think that, and I haven't told them this yet, but I think Mitchell Cohen is a really good person to talk to. He's a privacy expert. He's very knowledgeable in the privacy and regulatory landscape when it comes to data privacy and pretty much any privacy related issue. He's really a go-to person for me. So I think that he's really interesting. And the second person is Galina Gudry. She's a fraud expert when it comes to auditing and financial fraud as well. She has a very good understanding of financial fraud and auditing fraud. And once again, a go-to person for me when it comes to asking auditing and fraud specific questions. So those are really the two people that I'd elect to chat with you.
And what is the most overrated cybersecurity tactic?
I think that the most overrated cybersecurity tactic is AI. I think that people are using AI very loosely. I think that people are using AI when it's not really required. I think people are using AI to look cool and sound cool when really much more simple solutions are required. And I think that's really taking a step back and taking a look at the problem we're trying to identify is really the best solution to solving any kind of problem.
And what would you say is the most underrated cybersecurity tactic?
And honestly, I'm going to give you the same answer. I think it's AI. I think that AI has so many applications that we're not even thinking of right now. And I think that if we take a step back and we really take a look at problems and the way that people are consuming data and the way that organizations consume data, I think that we could really see positive effects that artificial intelligence can have on data analysis, data consumption, and giving predictive results that are going to really either make good decisions or prevent cybersecurity threats from happening.
And what advice would you have given to the younger Justin?
I think that relationship building is really important. I come from a pure tech background, and relationship building is something that I think that I've put on the back burner for very early on in my career. And in retrospect, I look back and I say, why? I think that relationship building is just so important. And it's something that I definitely should have done earlier, but I think it's something that I should have understood its importance a lot earlier.
And what would you say is the biggest cybersecurity mistake you ever made?
My first year of university, I accidentally DDoSed their network. Nobody was able to access the internet. This was like back in 2011. I was very passionate about discovering endpoints on networks and stuff like that. And it just stopped on me. Then I started to call my friends around the university, and everybody says, oh shit, my network ain't working anymore. And oh my God. So I stopped that activity very quickly.
And hopefully without too many grave consequences.
Honestly, I don't think they even know what happened. It was just a mess. Their whole network system was a mess.
And if you could ask one question of your peers, what would you ask them?
Yeah, I think I'm always very interested in knowing what people's challenges are. We all work in different sectors within the cybersecurity realm, and I'm always really curious to know what kind of problems people are facing right now. And on the behavioral biometric space, we face certain problems, but for example, within your organization, you're facing different challenges, and I'm always really curious to know what those challenges are.
And as a bonus question for our CEO, what would you ask him?
Oh man, now you really put me on the spot, because that's not I'd probably ask him the same question. What are some of the challenges you have today when it comes to the technical issues within the organization? I think that the natural language processing space is a big one, and I think that it can have a significant impact within the cybersecurity community. And you guys are doing an amazing job in really using great technology to solve a really challenging problem. But at the end of the day, people have challenges, especially when you innovate. I think that innovation is really important, and you guys are probably doing a lot of innovation. So my question would be, what's the challenge?
Awesome. Thank you so much again. And if anybody would like to reach out and pick your brain on this topic some more, what's the best way for them to reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, so you guys can always reach out to me, Justin Macorin, Macorin, and just find me on LinkedIn. I'm there. Just send out an invite and I'll accept pretty quickly.
Great. So, Justin, thank you so much for joining us today on Cybersecurity Heroes. And to the rest of you, we'll see you next time. That's a wrap for this episode of Cybersecurity Heroes. Practical and experiential knowledge on a day in the life of security heroes. Catch our next episode by subscribing or following through your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, please leave a rating for the show. They really help a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.